Hey, everyone. Let's see if I can get this. Great. We're going to talk about high-performing engineering teams. Right? We're all engineering leaders. This is what we care about. Most people call me Zotter. That's just the name I go by. And I like to say I've been failing for 20 years. This is my experience. Because I think we learn more through failure than sometimes through success. And it's through these failings that I've learned a lot about building and running engineering teams. And I want to share a few of the key takeaways with you today. But wouldn't it be great if our resume included all of our failures? Right? So this is actually true. I did this very early in my career. My first job, I dropped a table with 100 million rows in it. But I successfully recovered 99.9% of the data from a tape backup that was corrupted. And it was a pain. But I learned a lot, and hopefully now you trust me with your data a little bit more because I've been through that experience. Right? So I think failure is important. I asked a bunch of engineering leaders, what is high performance? What is the goal? What does a high-performing engineering team even mean? And I didn't get a straight answer. And we thought about this at Medium, and we actually defined it. So the goal really is to maximize long-term sustainable velocity. Maximize is always getting better. We want to improve. Long-term sustainable velocity, right? Long-term, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's called the death march for a reason. Nobody likes that. We don't want to burn people out. And velocity we define in the traditional agile sense, value delivered to customers over time. Right? Or another way to think about it is output. It's the output of your team. So really we're trying to maximize the output of our teams. And if you read this book by Andy Grove, High Output Management, this really transformed the way that I think about management. A manager's performance is the output of the team. And at Medium, we actually built this into our growth framework, and where we made managers accountable for the output of their team. So all the decisions that they're making, the way they're operating, is to increase that velocity or to maximize the output. Okay, so how do we do this with our teams and organizations, right? Because you get a team working, and then you can also get the organization that's also high performance. And there's 3 building blocks that I want to talk about, because that's really all I have time for. And it's love your people, use principles, and be passionate. So let's start with love your people. You're now a manager. You're now responsible for people. What do you do? Right? There's so many things and decisions that we make every day when we're now responsible for people. And my very first mentor when I was a manager said this to me: if you love and care for your team, the rest is easy. If we start from here, a lot of it becomes easy. We've been engineers. We know what it's like. We know how we want to be supported. We know we want to grow in our careers. If you do this, a lot of the stuff gets taken care of by itself. This is a bullshit statistic. 80% of success is determined by EQ. It's from a book, but it's been debunked. I don't know what it is, but it is high. Right? We got into this role because we do have emotional intelligence, or we do enjoy working with people, and it's so important. When I was first managing, it was about 10 years ago, an engineer came in on a Monday morning, and he said, can we grab a conference room? And a lot of you probably know where this is going. He resigned, right? And we went for a walk, and I was telling him how good performer he was, how important he is to the organization, how grateful I was for everything that he did. And he said, I never knew that. I didn't even think you liked me. The fact is I loved him, but I never told him. And sometimes we just forget to tell our people enough that we are grateful and that we appreciate them. And so now I try to do this as much as possible. I tell them I do appreciate them. I do want to recognize what they're doing. So that's super important. Now, I know this is not new. Luckily, this is very common nowadays. But 20 years ago when I started, managers didn't think like this. Actually, my first manager threw a chair at me because I dropped a 100 million row table. But what I want to add to this is we have this concept called holding both. When you become a manager, you need to balance maximizing the output of your team and loving your people. Right? And when those things are in balance, great things happen, and you do get high-performing teams. And so we want to put these two things in our mind when we're making decisions, right? What's good for the employee, what's good for the company. What's good for the employee, what's good for the team. Because sometimes loving your people is maybe letting them go, or switching teams, or switching roles. And so we always want to keep these things in mind. Okay, number 2, use principles. And principles is from this book, from Ray Dalio. We read this about a year ago at Medium, and it really transformed the way that we think about work and the way that I think about management. And give you a definition, principle is really just a rule set for how you do things. It's the operating rules. But the important thing is that you think about them and you write them down so everyone knows how you're going to operate. And so here's an example, principle, create and publish your principles. There's a lot that goes into that. I'll give you some more examples. Clearly define a team. A lot of companies don't do this. They just put a bunch of people together and they start working. But let's clearly define a team. We did this at Medium. We said a team is a cross-functional group that produces a working and tested increment of product or service. More examples. Teams should have a clear mission and objectives. They should have a purpose, right? Teams are way more motivated and perform much better when they know what they're doing and why they're doing it. Clearly define the roles on a team, so we know who's doing what. Before we do that, we need to clearly define a responsibility framework. We wrote all of this down. We use the RACI model. So we know when we're talking about this person, they are the R, or they're the A, they're the C, they're the I. And once we have this, then we can declare the roles, right? And so here are the 3 roles that we have for every single team at Medium. Product owner, Scrum Master, Engineering Manager. It may be different for your company. The point is we start from principles, and then we use those to develop the process that's going to be unique for your company. And you write it down. So when people join, they can look and they can see, oh, this person's doing this person's doing that. I know what a team is. I know what a team is responsible for. Here's another one. A team is empowered by the organization to organize and manage their own work. This is autonomy. I learned this very early in my career, that teams that are autonomous, that are able to make decisions, perform way better. First job, I was working for a professor who had a startup, and I had a problem, and went into his office, and I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, Zotter, get the hell out of my office. I'm eating. Actually, he said, Zotter, get the hell out of my office. I'm eating and my food is getting cold. Just fix it. And that stuck with me because until then, I didn't realize I had permission and authority to do things. And I really try to instill this with our teams. The teams are going to make mistakes, right? But we hire really smart people, so let's let them make decisions and let them do things. They're going to learn from their failures, and they're going to get better over time. The fix that I did was the actual drop of the table. So in this case, I actually did learn a lot. Okay, so I talked about purpose. Teams have purpose and autonomy. This might sound familiar. Dan Pink's Drive says 3 things: autonomy, mastery, purpose is what really motivates teams, right? So we also think about mastery a lot at Medium. We want to match engineers and people on teams that are going to be challenging and interesting to them, right? At Salesforce, actually I was at Salesforce, we had this thing called Open Opportunity Market, where every 4 months we allowed engineers to switch teams. We thought it would be complete chaos, but actually only about 5% of engineers switched teams. And it really highlighted some hotspots in the organization where people were leaving this manager, going to that manager, going to this manager. And we were able to take someone who might have been 2 years on this team, instead of them being bored and leaving the company, go to another team to learn something new or just try something different. So, autonomy, mastery, purpose. Okay, here's another principle. Strive for visible progress every sprint. This is related to the failing as well, right? We want to get stuff out there so we can learn and fail quickly so we can get better. This is very important at Medium. We follow this very religiously. About 10 years ago, I was working on a project where we worked several months building this new service. And when we found out that it was going to take 9 months to get the hardware installed in a data center and racked and stacked, this is before AWS, things took a really long time. The team was devastated. They worked really hard doing this. And what we did is, I took my corporate card and I was able to charge like $200,000 to Rackspace to do the hosting, which was great because we got the service out 9 months earlier. We got feedback, and so eventually when we released 9 months later, the product was that much better. But this was the CFO when he found out that I did that, because one of the learnings is, I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. I just one, tell them that you're going to do that. But the point is, I felt safe doing this because I had the autonomy, and the team felt safe doing this. We had the support of my manager and the rest of the organization. And so this is going back to the autonomy. I think it's super important. Just one last principle. Conduct retrospectives with the goal of getting better next time. This is really a strong principle at Medium. Everything that we do, whether it be releasing a feature or a project or a hire or a team formation, we do retrospectives. You might have heard of this. And the goal really is to get some actions out of that so we can get better over time. Okay, those are principles, right? And usually engineering leaders, we talk about process. And we come in, we want to do agile and sprints and this and that. And there's no one perfect process for any company. So I've started to think about it as principles. You start with principles, and then depending on the situation, the process comes out of that. All right, and then the last one, be passionate, right? Our job as engineering leaders is to hire, retain, inspire, and motivate engineers. We're pretty lucky that we have our choices, and we can work in the places that we want to work. And so we might as well work at something that you can be passionate about, right? Because we are going to be the ones recruiting and getting people on our teams. And I'll tell you the story on how I got to Medium. This is about 2.5 years ago. I was a founder of this company, and we did content recommendations for offers or ads on your website, right? And we were running out of money, and I was trying to get the company acquired. And we were talking to a bunch of different companies, a lot of them enterprise companies, and they wanted to use our technology to put better ads in front of your face, right? And that did not sit well with me. It felt really icky. I did not want to do that. And as we were building the product, we kept on doing more and more of this, collecting data. It was not good. And then I met Ev at Medium, and he was describing the new subscription model we have, and we're building a platform where anyone can have a voice. Anyone can tell a story. Anyone can get an audience, right? And it's not going to be driven by ads or sponsored content or dollars, right? And I was like, wow, that is something I can get behind. That is something I want to do with my life. And it reminded me of when Steve Jobs was trying to get John Scully to come over from Pepsi to be the CEO of Apple, if you remember that. He said, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life or come with me and change the world? Ev kind of said something like that, not quite. But I was like, oh, this is a real Silicon Valley moment. This is awesome. And I felt his passion, right? And I try to do that when I'm recruiting. And I went home, and I was telling my wife the story, and she says, well, if they're going to be the next Apple, of course you should go, right? And then she also reminded me that, well, it didn't really work out that well for John Scully. Didn't he get fired by the board? I'm like, yeah, but that was like many, many, many years later. So that's how I got to Medium. I felt his passion. I give that passion when I'm recruiting and inspiring teams, and that's my final thought. So 3 building blocks: love your people, use principles, be passionate. That's it.